Hey there, it's Lucas Catton, and welcome back to this next installment of the Narconon and Scientology Chronicles. And for this story, I'm going to talk about a rather landmark lawsuit against Narconon and Scientology by the National Association of Forensic Counselors, or the NAFC. This is an organization that certifies and offers various certifications for counselors who work in anything from substance use to criminal justice system, etc. And at some point, Narconon had figured out a way through one of its agents to get certifications from a distance. This gentleman decided that he had the ability to proctor it and had worked out some kind of arrangement and basically wound up assisting Narconon in filing false applications and getting people to pass the exam after, for example, like one of the things you have to document a number of hours worked in a field. And so they would make up things like, oh, okay, well, you did so many hours of Scientology training, so we're going to count this as, 1,000 hours of documented counseling. Or you've worked at Narconon for 2 years, so we're going to count that as, however many hundreds or thousands of hours of work experience. But that's not actually qualifications for certification. But that's what was going on onto these applications. And then they were taking these exams in groups and getting large batches of people and helping to answer questions and do study guides and all kind of things, basically scamming the system. And that's what happened. And so shortly after the string of deaths in 2012, and I began to speak out as well, and another gentleman, Eric Tenario, did, and I had written about it in the book, Have You Told All, and talked about falsifying these records in order to get certifications, because then Narconon would then use that to promote to people and say, hey, look, we have certified counselors, see? When in actual fact, it was a sham to begin with. They don't believe in actual training or therapy counselors in that regard. So it was a way to fake or scam the public into believing that they had trained and certified counselors there to deliver actual substance abuse treatment or therapy in that regard, when in actual fact they were just delivering Scientology services, watered down for Narconon. So 2012 was the last in a string of deaths that occurred at Narconon Arrowhead. Things started to come out at the end of the year as well. Eric Tenario files a formal complaint with the National Association of Forensic Counselors, and I file a supplemental complaint with them as well, corroborating some of the things that he stated. And we filed them separately. He lived in a different state at the time, and his account was what his personal experience was and what he saw at one Narconon center, and also at the time, I think he had worked at Oklahoma for a period of time as well. And I know he did for a long time, but he was in Michigan, I think, at the time that he filed it. And then I was in Oklahoma and actually living in Georgia finally at that time when I filed my complaint and shared my experiences. So they began this investigation, and various Narconon staff members, including Gary Smith, who was the executive director of Narconon Arrowhead at the time, started to lose their certifications because as the NAFC, headed by Carla Taylor, as they started to dig into this and took these very seriously, these allegations, they started to find all kinds of violations, like people who were still considering themselves or using the Certified Chemical Dependency Counselor or CCDC certification, who hadn't ever renewed it, and they're still claiming to have this level of certification, or people who, didn't meet the qualifications. And so they requested some type of documentation and they couldn't prove it. And so, it was revoked, or, various reasons that all these people started to claim that they were certified counselors and yet in actual fact didn't have any of the necessary qualifications. Very few. There may have been a couple here and there that did, but, and those who did were able to retain them at first. Like if they could provide documentation and show that it was valid and they had, the necessary schooling and things like that, then of course they did their due diligence at that point. So as they continue to dig deeper and find all these various violations, and about a year later, in May of 2014, I believe, the NAFC filed this huge lawsuit against Narconon Arrowhead, Narconon International, I think the Church of Scientology International, David Miscavige as the head of that, Able International, and like 80 total defendants, or 82 total defendants, individuals who had violated that and continued to pretend that they were certified and promoted themselves as it. And so it was a matter of fraud that should have been really taken up more on the state of Oklahoma, but we can get into that more into a different video. We talked a little bit about it on the Department of Mental Health, but we can get more into that as well on some of the fraud allegations and stuff. But also for trademark infringement was part of this lawsuit, is that they're using the NAFC's logo and name in promoting their services as being endorsed by the NAFC, and as these counselors meeting the qualifications, when in actual fact, the vast majority did not meet these qualifications. So this lawsuit comes out May of 2014, about a year after really the whole thing was exposed. It took that long to dive in and find all of this evidence, very, very solid evidence. And the lawsuit continued for a while, to a point where they were bringing together, lots of various depositions and going in and tons of discovery and all these kinds of things that really go into doing a thorough discovery on a case this big, trying to be able to get as much information as possible. But unfortunately, when you enter into a lawsuit with Narconon and Church of Scientology, they throw a lot into it, because their goal is to make it take as long as possible, make it be as painful as possible, and then hold out until the very end when you're about to go to trial, and then they settle. That's what they do. They don't want the information actually appearing in court on public record then. And if you look, very few lawsuits against them actually make it to a trial phase. And that's because of how they approach it. That once some of these things start to get exposed into public record and that are filed into the court record, such as some of the depositions and some of the discovery items, then they pull back and say, okay, we're going to settle, but we want to seal such and such documents, and we don't want this to see the light of day. And I don't know the details of the settlement of that particular lawsuit or exactly how it turned out in terms of what all happened, but I do know that today there are zero that I'm aware of. I'm sorry, I haven't seen a single Narconon staff member promote him or herself as a certified chemical dependency counselor through the NAFC ever since then. And in fact, I think there was a statement issued by the Narconon board of directors to some local news agencies back in May, when the lawsuit had filed. It said, Narconon denies these allegations, of course, and we've had no contact with the NAFC or affiliation for more than a year, because all of their certifications have been revoked. So, this is an example of one of the many examples of how this organization pretends to be something it's not. They want to pretend to be that they are legitimate in terms of the eyes of the general public, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. So when they say we've got tons of certified counselors, the reality is that they've done something to falsify those certifications. They've cheated in some way. They've done something, and this proved out in this particular lawsuit. And there's probably more. There's other places out there where they have obtained certifications from. One of them that was talked about, Eric Tenorio went on Rock Center with me back in 2013, and he talked about another group that was issuing certifications that held no weight whatsoever. You just paid them some money, and they would send out a certification. So there was there's a long history of fraud there and misrepresentation, and a huge thanks to the NAFC for diving in and exposing the truth, and a huge thanks to Carla Taylor for taking those allegations very seriously and cleaning up all of the old records and providing solid evidence to show the fraud that occurred. And I think that it's something that shouldn't ever be forgotten that Narconon has done, because just because they may not be using that organization to present themselves as something they're not, doesn't mean they're not still doing it. So when they dive in to current operations of any facilities that are still open, many of them have shut down. Others are at 50% capacity or less. Arrowhead itself is at about 10% capacity of what it used to be. Then, see how they portray themselves, and are they being honest? And chances are they're not. I hope this helps. If you have any questions at all, I'll include a link here. There's, I think Tony Ortega had included that, and a copy of the original lawsuit. And there's, various links. You can check it out if you want. But there was a lot of exposure that occurred, and this organization holding up its standards was very important. And I think that speaks a lot about them, and it also in turn speaks a lot about Narconon in terms of how they try and falsify what it is that they do to try and lure people into their stuff. Because if they just told the truth, people wouldn't come. That's the reality. If they wouldn't have to have all of these other fronts and smoke and mirrors things, because just the pure light of day shining on, and exposing the actions is enough to where people wouldn't go. People wouldn't go. So there you go. That's it for this installment of Narconon Scientology Chronicles. Stay tuned for more. Take care.